An arrogant millionaire mocks a single mom. The DNA test he takes next leaves him speechless. Nathaniel Blackwell strode into the lavish ballroom, his tailored suit accentuating his commanding presence. The room buzzed with the chatter of the city's elite, eagerly awaiting his arrival. With a smirk on his face, Nathaniel reveled in the power he held over the crowd. As he made his way through the sea of admirers, his eyes fell upon a young woman standing timidly in the corner. Her simple dress and nervous demeanor set her apart from the extravagantly dressed guests. Nathaniel approached her, his curiosity piqued by her presence at such an exclusive event. "And who might you be?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. The woman looked up, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "I'm Sarah Miller. I'm here on behalf of the community center. We were hoping to secure a donation from Mr. Blackwell to support our programs." Nathaniel scoffed. "A donation? For a community center? My dear, I have far more important things to spend my money on than some little charity project." Sarah's face flushed with embarrassment, but she refused to back down. "Mr. Blackwell, our programs provide essential support for struggling families. A small contribution from someone like you could make a world of difference." Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. "Someone like me? You have no idea who you're talking to. I've built an empire through my own hard work and determination. I don't owe anything to anyone, least of all to a single mother begging for handouts." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she grabbed her purse and hurried out of the ballroom, leaving Nathaniel to bask in his own arrogance. Sarah walked home, her heart heavy with disappointment. She had hoped that attending the gala would give her a chance to secure much-needed funding for the community center. But Nathaniel Blackwell's cruel words had shattered any hope she had. As she entered her modest apartment, Sarah was greeted by the sight of her 8-year-old son, Ethan, sitting at the kitchen table, working on his homework. He looked up and smiled, his bright eyes filled with love and admiration for his mother. "How was the fancy party, Mom?" Ethan asked eagerly. Sarah forced a smile. "It was okay, sweetie. But I didn't get the donation we were hoping for." Ethan's face fell. "Oh. I'm sorry, Mom. I know how hard you've been working to keep the community center going." Sarah pulled her son into a tight hug. "Don't you worry about that, Ethan. We'll find a way. We always do." As she held her son close, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was something strangely familiar about Nathaniel Blackwell. But she pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the challenges that lay ahead. Nathaniel sat in his opulent office, his mind still reeling from his encounter with Sarah Miller. There was something about her that had struck a chord deep within him, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he barked. His assistant, Julia, entered the room, a stack of papers in her hand. "Mr. Blackwell, I have the results of the DNA test you requested." Nathaniel's heart skipped a beat. He had ordered the test on a whim, after a nagging feeling that he couldn't shake. "And," he demanded. Julia hesitated. "Sir, the results confirm that Ethan Miller is your biological son." The room spun around Nathaniel as the truth sank in. The boy he had dismissed so callously was his own flesh and blood. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks, and for the first time in his life, Nathaniel Blackwell was at a loss for words. Sarah sat at her desk in the community center, poring over the center's financial records. The numbers weren't adding up, and she knew that without a significant influx of funds, the center would be forced to close its doors. As she buried her head in her hands, a commotion outside caught her attention. She looked up to see a sleek black car pulling up to the curb, and her heart sank as she recognized the figure stepping out of the back seat. Nathaniel Blackwell strode into the community center, his face a mask of determination. Sarah stood up, ready to defend her work and her community. "Mr. Blackwell, I'm surprised to see you here," she said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. Nathaniel cleared his throat. "Ms. Miller, I owe you an apology. My behavior at the gala was inexcusable, and I deeply regret the way I treated you." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. That means a lot. Nathaniel took a deep breath. There's something else. I recently discovered that your son, Ethan, is my biological child. Sarah gasped, her mind reeling with the implications of his words. What? How? Nathaniel held up a hand. It's a long story, but suffice it to say that I made some poor choices in my past. But I want to make things right. I want to be a part of Ethan's life, and I want to support the work you're doing here at the community center. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she processed the news. I don't know what to say. This is all so overwhelming. Nathaniel reached out and took her hand. I know. But I'm here now, and I'm committed to being the father that Ethan deserves. And I'm committed to supporting this community in any way I can. As Sarah looked into Nathaniel's eyes, she saw a glimmer of hope for the future. Maybe, just maybe, they could build something beautiful out of the ashes of their past. News of Nathaniel Blackwell's connection to Sarah and Ethan Miller spread like wildfire through the community. Some were shocked, others were skeptical, but all were curious to see how the wealthy businessman would handle his newfound role as a father. For Sarah, the revelation brought a mix of emotions. On one hand, she was grateful for the financial support that Nathaniel had promised to provide for the community center. But on the other hand, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease at the thought of letting him into their lives. Ethan, however, was thrilled at the prospect of getting to know his father. Despite Sarah's reservations, she couldn't deny the joy that lit up her son's face every time Nathaniel came to visit. As the weeks passed, Nathaniel found himself spending more and more time at the community center. He watched in awe as Sarah and her team worked tirelessly to provide support and resources to struggling families. And he began to see the world through a different lens, one that valued compassion and empathy over wealth and power. But not everyone was happy about Nathaniel's newfound involvement in the community. His business partners and social circles were quick to voice their disapproval, warning him that associating with those people would only tarnish his reputation. Nathaniel brushed off their concerns, but he knew that he was walking a fine line. He had spent his entire life building his empire, and the thought of losing it all was almost too much to bear. As Nathaniel struggled to balance his new role as a father with his responsibilities as a businessman, Sarah faced her own set of challenges. Despite the financial support from Nathaniel, the community center was still struggling to make ends meet. Sarah poured her heart and soul into her work, often staying late into the night to plan programs and events. But the stress was starting to take its toll, and she found herself snapping at Ethan and pushing away the people who cared about her. One evening, as Sarah sat hunched over her desk, a soft knock at the door startled her out of her thoughts. She looked up to see Nathaniel standing in the doorway, a concerned look on his face. "Sarah, what are you still doing here?" he asked, stepping into the room. "It's late, and you look exhausted." Sarah sighed. "I know, but there's just so much to do. I can't let these families down." Nathaniel sat down beside her. "You're not letting anyone down, Sarah. You're doing an incredible job here. But you can't do it all on your own. You need to take care of yourself, too." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I know, but it's just so hard. I feel like I'm failing at everything as a mother, as a director, as a person." Nathaniel took her hand. "You're not failing, Sarah. You're one of the strongest, most resilient people I've ever met. And you have a whole community of people who love and support you. Including me." Sarah looked up at him, surprise and gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you, Nathaniel. That means more to me than you know." As they sat there, hand in hand, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope for the future. Maybe, just maybe, they could weather this storm together. As the days turned into weeks, Nathaniel found himself spending more and more time at the community center. He watched in awe as Sarah and her team worked tirelessly to provide support and resources to struggling families, and he began to see the world through a different lens. But not everyone was happy about Nathaniel's newfound involvement in the community. His business partners and social circles were quick to voice their disapproval, warning him that associating with those people would only tarnish his reputation. Nathaniel brushed off their concerns, but he knew that he was walking a fine line. He had spent his entire life building his empire, and the thought of losing it all was almost too much to bear. One evening, as he sat in his office, his phone rang. It was Julia, his assistant. "Mr. Blackwell, I'm sorry to bother you, but there's a situation at the office. The board is calling an emergency meeting, and they're demanding your presence." Nathaniel sighed. "I'll be right there." As he made his way to the office, Nathaniel's mind raced with the possibilities. Had his involvement with the community center finally caught up with him? Were his partners going to force him out of the company he had built from the ground up? When he arrived at the meeting, the tension in the room was palpable. His partners sat around the table, their faces grim. "Nathaniel, we need to talk," one of them said. "Your recent behavior has been concerning, to say the least. Your involvement with that community center is a liability to the company, and we can't afford to have our reputation tarnished by association." Nathaniel's jaw clenched. "My involvement with the community center is not up for debate. I'm doing what I believe is right, and I won't apologize for that." The board members exchanged glances. "Nathaniel, we're not asking you to apologize. We're asking you to choose. It's either the company or the community center. You can't have both." Nathaniel's heart sank. He had worked so hard to build his empire, but the thought of turning his back on Sarah and Ethan was unthinkable. He took a deep breath. "Then I choose the community center. I choose my family." The room erupted in chaos, but Nathaniel stood firm. He knew that he was making the right choice, even if it meant losing everything he had worked for. News of Nathaniel's decision spread quickly through the community center. Sarah was shocked when she heard the news, but a part of her couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and admiration for the man who had once been so callous and cruel. Ethan, on the other hand, was overjoyed. He had grown to love his father in the short time they had known each other, and the thought of having him around more often filled him with excitement. But as the days passed, the reality of Nathaniel's decision began to sink in. Without his company and his wealth, he was just another struggling single father, trying to make ends meet. Sarah watched as Nathaniel struggled to adjust to his new life. Gone were the tailored suits and fancy cars, replaced by second-hand clothes and public transportation. But despite the challenges, Nathaniel never complained. He threw himself into his work at the community center, determined to make a difference in the lives of the families they served. One day, as Sarah and Nathaniel were working side by side in the center's community garden, Sarah turned to him. "Nathaniel, I just wanted to say thank you. For everything you've done for us, for the sacrifices you've made. I know it hasn't been easy." Nathaniel smiled. "It's been worth it, Sarah. Being here, with you and Ethan, helping these families, it's given me a sense of purpose that I never had before. I spent so many years chasing wealth and power, but I never realized how empty it all was until I found something worth fighting for." Sarah's heart swelled with emotion. She reached out and took Nathaniel's hand, squeezing it gently. "We're lucky to have you, Nathaniel. And not just because of the money or the resources, but because of who you are and the man you've become." Nathaniel's eyes shone with tears. "I'm the lucky one, Sarah. You and Ethan have given me a second chance at life, and I'll never be able to repay you for that." As they stood there, hand in hand, surrounded by the fruits of their labor, Sarah knew that they had something special. Something worth fighting for, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Despite the challenges they faced, Sarah and Nathaniel found strength in each other and in the community they served. They worked tirelessly to keep the center afloat, pouring their hearts and souls into every program and every family they helped. But even with their best efforts, the center was still struggling. Donations were down, and expenses were piling up. Sarah knew that they needed a miracle if they were going to survive. One day, as Sarah sat at her desk, her head in her hands, Nathaniel burst into the room. "Sarah, I have an idea," he said, his eyes shining with excitement. What if we hold a fundraiser? A big event where we can showcase all the incredible work we're doing here and invite the whole community to get involved? Sarah looked up, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. That's a great idea, Nathaniel. But how would we pull it off? We don't have the money or the resources to put on a big event like that. Nathaniel grinned. Leave that to me. I may not have my company anymore, but I still have a few tricks up my sleeve. Over the next few weeks, Nathaniel threw himself into planning the fundraiser. He called in favors from old friends and business associates, securing donations and sponsorships from across the city. He worked with Sarah and the rest of the team to put together a program that would showcase the incredible work they were doing and the impact they were having on the community. On the night of the event, the community center was transformed. Twinkling lights and colorful decorations filled the space, and the air buzzed with excitement. Families from across the neighborhood came out in droves, eager to support the center that had given them so much. As Sarah stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces before her, she felt a swell of emotion. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here tonight, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. The work we do here at the community center is so important, but we couldn't do it without your support. Your donations, your time, your love, it means everything to us. Nathaniel stepped up beside her, taking her hand in his. And I want to thank Sarah, he said, his voice filled with pride. She is the heart and soul of this center, and the reason we're all here tonight. Her dedication, her compassion, her unwavering commitment to this community, it's an inspiration to us all. As the crowd erupted in applause, Sarah and Nathaniel looked at each other, their eyes shining with love and gratitude. They had come so far and faced so many challenges, but together, they knew they could overcome anything. The fundraiser was a resounding success, raising more money than Sarah and Nathaniel had ever dreamed possible. With the newfound resources, they were able to expand their programs and reach even more families in need. But even as they celebrated their victories, Sarah and Nathaniel knew that their work was far from over. The challenges facing their community were deep and systemic, and it would take more than just money to solve them. One day, as they sat in the community garden, Sarah turned to Nathaniel. I've been thinking, she said, her brow furrowed with concern. We've been so focused on keeping the center afloat that we haven't had time to really think about the bigger picture. What are we doing to address the root causes of poverty and inequality in our community? Nathaniel nodded, his own thoughts mirroring hers. You're right, he said. We can't just keep putting band-aids on the problem. We need to think bigger, to find ways to create lasting change. Together, they began to brainstorm ideas. They reached out to other community leaders and organizations, building coalitions and partnerships to tackle the issues facing their neighborhood. They advocated for policy changes at the local and state level, using their voices and their platform to push for meaningful reform. As their efforts gained momentum, Sarah and Nathaniel found themselves at the center of a growing movement for change. They spoke at rallies and town halls, sharing their stories and their vision for a more just and equitable society. But with their newfound visibility came new challenges. They faced pushback from those who benefited from the status quo, who saw their work as a threat to their own power and privilege. One evening, as they walked home from a particularly contentious meeting, Sarah turned to Nathaniel. Do you ever feel like we're fighting a losing battle? She asked, her voice heavy with exhaustion. Like no matter how hard we try, things will never really change. Nathaniel stopped, taking her face in his hands. I know it feels that way sometimes, he said, his voice filled with conviction. But we can't give up. We've come too far, and there are too many people counting on us. We have to keep fighting, no matter how hard it gets. Sarah nodded, drawing strength from his words. She knew he was right. They had a responsibility to keep pushing forward, to keep fighting for the world they knew was possible. Chapter 12. As the months passed, Sarah and Nathaniel's work began to bear fruit. Slowly but surely, they saw changes taking root in their community. New programs and initiatives were launched, aimed at addressing the systemic issues that had held their neighborhood back for so long. But even as they celebrated their victories, they knew that their work was far from over. There were still so many families in need, so many injustices to be righted. One day, as they sat in the community center, surrounded by the families they had fought so hard to serve, Sarah turned to Nathaniel. "I've been thinking about something," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "About what it means to be a family and to be part of a community." Nathaniel nodded, his own thoughts turning to Ethan and the bond they had forged. "Family isn't just about blood," he said. "It's about love and commitment and showing up for each other, no matter what." Sarah smiled, taking his hand in hers. "That's what this place is about," she said, gesturing to the room around them. "It's about creating a family, a community, where everyone belongs and everyone has a chance to thrive." Nathaniel squeezed her hand, his heart filled with love and pride. He knew that he had found his true purpose, his true family, in this place and with these people. As Nathaniel and Sarah's relationship deepened, they began to dream of a future together. They talked about marriage, about building a life and a family of their own. But even as they planned for their future, they never lost sight of their commitment to the community they served. They knew that their love for each other was inextricably linked to their love for their neighbors, their city, their world. One evening, as they walked hand in hand through the streets of their neighborhood, Nathaniel turned to Sarah. "I never thought I would find happiness like this," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "I never thought I would find a love that could transform me, that could give my life meaning and purpose." Sarah smiled, leaning into his embrace. "You've transformed me too," she said. "You've shown me what it means to be brave, to fight for what's right, to never give up on the people and the things that matter most." As they walked on, the streets around them alive with the sounds and rhythms of their community, Nathaniel and Sarah knew that they were exactly where they were meant to be. They had found their home, their calling, their purpose, in each other and in the work they shared. Years passed, and the community center thrived under Sarah and Nathaniel's leadership. They expanded their programs, built new partnerships, and touched countless lives with their dedication and compassion. And as they watched their own family grow, with the addition of a daughter and another son, they knew that they were building something that would endure, something that would outlast them and continue to make a difference in the world. One day, as they sat in the community garden, surrounded by the lush greenery and vibrant blooms, Nathaniel turned to Sarah. "Do you remember that day, all those years ago, when we first met?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with memory. Sarah laughed. "How could I forget?" she said. "You were so arrogant, so dismissive. I never would have guessed that you would become the man you are today." Nathaniel nodded, his face growing serious. "I was a different person then," he said. "I was lost, empty, searching for something I didn't even know I needed. But you showed me the way. You showed me what it means to live with purpose, with compassion, with love." Sarah took his hand, her own eyes filling with tears. "We've come so far," she said. "We've built something beautiful, something that will endure long after we're gone. And it all started with a choice, a decision to open our hearts and our minds to something greater than ourselves." As they sat there, hand in hand, surrounded by the fruits of their labor and the love of their family and community, Sarah and Nathaniel knew that they had found their true calling. They had found the power to transform lives, to create change, to build a world where every person had the chance to thrive. And they knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, with the strength and the love and the hope that had brought them this far. Together, they had found their happily ever after. And together, they would continue to build a future filled with possibility, with promise, and with endless love.